It started like any other morning for Officer Daniels. His uniform was pressed, his badge gleaming, and his patrol car ready for the day ahead. Daniels liked to think of himself as a man who kept order in a chaotic world. He prided himself on his instincts on knowing who did and didn't belong. The sun was just climbing above the horizon as Daniels cruised through the quieter streets of the city. He scanned the sidewalks and the passing cars, his sharp eyes looking for anything that seemed off. It was a routine he'd mastered over the years. Spot someone who didn't look like they fit in. Pull them over. Ask a few questions. Assert his authority. That's when he saw her. A sleek black sedan rolled past him at a stoplight. The driver was a black woman, her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She looked calm, her face focused as she waited for the light to change. Her car was clean, polished even, and her clothes were sharp, too sharp, Daniels thought, for someone driving through this part of town. To him, something about her didn't sit right. Daniels narrowed his eyes, watching as the sedan pulled away when the light turned green. He couldn't explain it, not exactly. Maybe it was the way her car seemed out of place on this street. Maybe it was the way she held herself, too confident, too collected. Or maybe it was just the fact that she didn't fit into the box Daniels had built in his mind. He flicked on his patrol lights and pulled out behind her. The car slowed down almost immediately, signaling to the side of the road. Daniels smirked. That was how it always started. They stopped, they complied, and then he got to remind them who was in charge. As he stepped out of his patrol car, Daniels adjusted his belt, making sure his holster was in clear view. He liked the sense of power it gave him, the way people's eyes darted to it as he approached. He tapped his flashlight against his palm, a habit more than anything, and walked up to the driver's side window. The woman inside was calm, her face neutral as she rolled the window down. Daniels leaned in slightly, his shadow falling across her lap. "License and registration," he said, his tone clipped and commanding. Without a word, the woman reached into her glove compartment. She moved slowly, deliberately, like she'd done this before. Daniels watched her closely, his eyes scanning her every movement. When she handed over her documents, Daniels took them without so much as a thank you. He glanced at the name on the license, Erica Mills. Her name didn't mean anything to him. "What brings you out here?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Erica met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I'm just on my way to work," she replied, her tone even and polite. Daniels raised an eyebrow. He looked back at her car, then at her again. "Nice ride," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Doesn't seem like the kind of car someone like you would drive." For a split second, something flickered in Erica's eyes, something sharp and cutting. But just as quickly, it was gone. She didn't react to his comment, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she folded her hands neatly in her lap and waited. Daniels didn't like that. He didn't like the way she stayed so calm, so composed. He liked it when people squirmed, when they stammered and tried to explain themselves. But this woman, this Erica Mills, she didn't do any of that. He straightened up, holding her license and registration in one hand as he looked back at his patrol car. "Wait here," he said, his tone sharper now. Erica didn't respond. She simply nodded, her face still as calm as it had been when he first approached. As Daniels walked back to his car, he muttered to himself. "Something's off about her," he said under his breath. "Nobody's that calm when they get pulled over." He ran her information through the system, half expecting to find something, a warrant, a suspended license, anything that would give him a reason to push further. But the screen came back clean. No violations. No red flags. Nothing. Daniels frowned, drumming his fingers against the edge of the computer. It didn't make sense. People like her, people who didn't belong, they always had something to hide. He glanced back at the black sedan. Erica was still sitting there, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She wasn't looking at him, she was staring straight ahead, her face unreadable. Daniels felt a flicker of irritation. She was too composed, too collected. It was almost like she was mocking him. He grabbed his ticket book and stepped out of the patrol car, his jaw set. If the system didn't give him a reason, he'd find one himself. As he approached the sedan again, he could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't the usual kind of tension he felt during a traffic stop. This was different, sharper, heavier. Daniels leaned down again, his shadow falling across Erica's face. "You sure you don't have anything else to tell me?" he asked, his voice low and pointed. Erica looked up at him, her gaze steady. "I'm sure," she replied, her tone as calm as ever. Daniels narrowed his eyes. He didn't like this. He didn't like her calmness, her confidence. It made him feel small. But what Daniels couldn't see, what he never even considered, was that this woman, Erica Mills, wasn't just anyone. She was someone who could change his life forever. And not in the way he expected. Daniels stood by the side of the car, his fingers gripping his ticket book tightly. The slight chill of the morning air brushed against his skin, but he barely noticed it. His focus was locked on Erica Mills, the woman who had somehow unsettled him without saying much of anything. He had done this hundreds, no, thousands of times before. A quick stop, a little show of authority, and people would usually squirm. But not Erica. She sat there, calm, composed, as though she wasn't intimidated by him at all. That irritated Daniels. "Step out of the vehicle," he barked. His voice was sharper this time, almost challenging her to defy him. Erica turned her head slightly, her brow arching in mild confusion. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice still level. "I said step out of the vehicle," Daniels repeated, ignoring her question. With a quiet sigh, Erica unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. She stepped out with a fluid grace that caught Daniels off guard. She wasn't flustered or defensive. Instead, she moved like someone who was used to being in control, even when the odds weren't in her favor. Daniels tilted his head, studying her. Her tailored blazer and polished shoes spoke of someone successful, someone who had worked hard to get where they were. But all Daniels could see was someone who didn't fit. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, taking a step back. Erica raised her hands slightly, her movements deliberate. "What exactly are you looking for, officer?" she asked, her tone measured. Daniels ignored the question again. He started circling her car, peering through the windows as though he might spot something suspicious. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, anything, really, that would justify this stop. "Where are you headed?" Daniels asked after a moment, still peering into the back seat. Erica turned her head to follow his movements. "I already told you," she said. "I'm on my way to work." "And where do you work?" Daniels pressed, his tone tinged with sarcasm. "Around here," Erica replied vaguely. Daniels stopped and turned to face her. Her nonchalant answer only fueled his suspicion. "Around here? You want to be more specific?" Erica tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. "Not really," she said. The casual response made Daniels' jaw tighten. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You think this is funny?" "No," Erica replied, her voice still calm. "I just don't think it's relevant." Daniels' face reddened. He wasn't used to this. Most people stammered and stumbled over their words when he questioned them. But Erica wasn't like most people. He reached for his radio, muttering something about needing backup. Erica watched him calmly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You've got some nerve," Daniels muttered as he clipped the radio back to his shoulder. Erica's brow furrowed slightly, as though she were finally tiring of his games. "Officer," she said, her tone soft but firm, "am I being detained?" Daniels blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. "Excuse me. I asked if I'm being detained," Erica repeated. Her voice didn't rise, but there was a weight to her words that made Daniels hesitate. "I'm investigating a potential violation," Daniels said quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "A potential violation," Erica repeated, her gaze piercing. "And what, exactly, have I done to warrant this investigation?" Daniels opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, he was at a loss for words. He wasn't used to people questioning him, especially not like this. "Step back," he barked finally, pointing toward the sidewalk. Erica didn't move right away. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. For the first time, Daniels felt a flicker of unease. "Officer," Erica said slowly, "I'm going to ask you again, am I being detained?" Daniels clenched his jaw. His instincts told him to double down, to assert his authority, but something about her demeanor made him hesitate. Before he could respond, the distant sound of a car engine drew both of their attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up behind Daniels' patrol car, and two men in suits stepped out. Daniels turned, his confusion evident. He didn't call for that kind of backup. The men approached, their movements quick and purposeful. "Officer Daniels," one of them asked, holding up a badge. "Yeah," Daniels replied cautiously. "What's going on?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at Erica, who nodded slightly. The exchange was subtle but deliberate, and Daniels felt his stomach drop. "What is this?" Daniels demanded, his voice rising. The man turned back to Daniels, his expression serious. "You'll find out soon enough." Daniels' mind raced as the two men approached Erica. She didn't flinch or falter. Instead, she smiled a small, knowing smile that sent a chill down Daniels' spine. Daniels' patrol car followed closely behind, his lights flashing in sharp, rhythmic bursts of red and blue. The piercing sound of the siren broke the calm of the morning as the sleek black sedan slowed to a crawl and pulled to the side of the road. Inside the sedan, Erica Mills remained calm, or at least, that's how she appeared. Her face was a mask of neutrality, her features composed and unreadable. But her hands betrayed her. They gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white against the smooth leather. She had seen this scenario play out before, and she knew exactly what to expect. The condescending tone, the probing questions, the subtle but sharp digs meant to remind her of her place. It wasn't new. It was almost predictable. In her rearview mirror, she saw the patrol car door swing open, and Officer Daniels stepped out. He adjusted his belt as he walked toward her car, his expression a mix of confidence and irritation. The morning sun glinted off his badge, but there was no warmth in his demeanor. Erica took a deep breath, steadying herself. Daniels reached her window and rapped on it sharply with his knuckle. She rolled it down, her movements precise and deliberate, and looked up at him. "License and registration," he barked, skipping any attempt at politeness. Without a word, Erica reached into the glove compartment, her movements slow and measured. She had been taught to avoid any sudden motions, especially in situations like this. She retrieved her documents and handed them over, her fingers brushing against his as she did. Daniel snatched them from her hand, his eyes narrowing as he examined them. His gaze flicked from her license to her face and then to the car she was driving. A small, smug smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "A little too nice of a car for someone like you, don't you think?" he said, his voice laced with thinly veiled disdain. The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Erica felt the familiar sting of his comment, but she didn't flinch. She kept her expression steady, her face giving away nothing. She had learned long ago not to let people like Daniel see her sweat. Daniels tilted his head, waiting for a reaction.